to the Clemson Dubcast. It is Friday, January 19th at TigerIllustrated.com. Today, from yours truly, a column on what is up with Clemson's basketball team. Spent some time Thursday on the phone to get some insight from behind the scenes. I don't think it's panic time yet, but certainly some questions about this team that you're kind of a little surprised to be asking, given what we saw earlier in the season. My good friends Blake Smith and Brooke Archenhold have been part of the podcast since the beginning, way back in August of 2018. They have an accomplished team of personal injury attorneys at Parham, Smith, and Archenhold based in Greenville. They are Clemson people, and their skillful attorneys have decades of experience in complicated litigation matters, taking a special interest in medical malpractice, nursing home abuse, and neglect, car accident cases that have left the individuals involved in serious trouble. For a free consultation at Parham, Smith, and Archenhold, call 864-990-4581 or online at parhamlaw.com. That's PARHAM law.com. When you're ready for a complete renovation in your home or business, open the door to more with Harris Home and Harris Commercial. Their local experienced team will totally transform any room space, from beautiful floor coverings to construction to finished details. Harris handles every step of your renovation process, whether it's a kitchen or living room or an industrial or educational setting, like some of the positively stunning work they've done at Clemson University. Go to discoverharris.com and experience a total renovation transformation from Harris Home and Harris Commercial. Solero Communications, formerly known as Tandem Payment, is a full-service integrated electronic payments provider powered by leading-edge technology. Solero provides a wide array of merchant solutions, simplified payments. They make onboarding, taking payments, maintaining risk management and compliance, and getting support quick and easy. At Solero, they're all about helping you achieve sustainable growth as a business. Taking payments isn't the only thing your business needs. With Solero's solutions, you can manage inventory, sell products and services via social media, schedule staff, track sales, get reports, and much, much more. Find out more about Solero at solerocommerce.com. That's CELERO commerce.com. Okay, Chris Lowe, one of the most connected people in the business, certainly the most connected when it comes to all things Nick Saban. Great stuff here recounting last week. Also just assessing the state of things in college football. Really enjoyed this. Here we go. All right, joined by my longtime good friend Chris Lowe of ESPN. How you doing, sir?
Larry, it's always good to be with you, man. Catch up.
Yes, and I thank you. And I mean, I know you are a busy man, and so I don't take these opportunities for granted that you give me. I probably don't deserve them, but I just over the last week or so, in light of recent events, most notably in Tuscaloosa, I'm like, man, this would be a great conversation to talk about some of this stuff that has happened.
No, I'm always good talking with you. As you said, we go back a long ways, and I just I'm a lot like you. I find it fascinating how quickly and how much college football has changed over the last 5 years, really.
Oh, man, yes.
Yeah, where we are and the comings and goings, and not just players, but coaches, and how players sort of are empowered to the point now where if you have one coach leave, certainly a really established coach like a Saban, I think the same thing would happen if, let's say, if Kirby Smart were to take the Falcons job tomorrow. With the way you got that window there, that 30-day window where kids can transfer and play right away, I mean, every school that loses a coach of note probably is going to have to go through, to some degree, what Alabama is right now.
Is it kind of problematic to make to say that, put on equal terms the idea of, you mentioned player empowerment, of course, player movement, a big part of that, and I see various voices sort of using the premise of, well, you know, coaches have been allowed to have freedom of movement for a long time, so it's only fair that, you know, why should we be upset if players are doing the same thing? But it's not the same thing. You know, coaches have contracts.
Yeah, it's not apples to apples. You're exactly right. And it's, coaches have, there are ramifications for coaches if they leave. Buyouts. I mean, I'll give you two real examples. Dan Lanning at Oregon, who was, certainly his name was bandied about in an Alabama job, had a $22 million buyout. So had he left for anywhere, he would have owed $22 million, or somebody would have owed Oregon $22 million. Kalen DeBoer, who took the Bama job, had a $12 million buyout. So these guys are contractual employees by the university. I'm talking about coaches. Now, I'm not going to sit here and say that coaches don't chase money, because they do. They absolutely 1,000% do. But no, it's not an apples to apples argument, because players right now are free to move about as many times as they want without any ramifications. They don't have to set out a year. They're not employees. And maybe the answer is to make them employees and have contracts and salary caps. I know a lot of people are fighting that, but how many, you covered Clemson for a long time. How many hours a week do you think someone like a Barrett Carter or any of their players spend in football, practicing, watching film, getting treatment to be ready to play, et cetera? What would be your ballpark figure?
Well, Chris, the rules say less than 20, so it'd have to be less than 20, right?
Well, everybody follows the rules in college football, right?
I mean, it's just, that's one of the preposterous things, is that, like, I mean, come on, it's a full-time job. I mean, it's at least 40 hours, right? Everything included.
Travel, to games. If you're playing a weekend game away from home, travel. Now, guys can take their iPads and go up in their room and watch film all they want, and that's not supposed to count. But we know players. We've heard stories, and you've written stories about guys who are hurt, who maybe have a high ankle sprain, and they're in the complex for 8 hours a day trying to get treatment just so they can play or be closer to ready to play that Saturday. So does that count? You're right. It's preposterous to think that most kids spend only 20 hours a week on practicing or getting ready or preparing to play football. And there's quote unquote voluntary workouts this summer. There's nothing voluntary about them except in name only. And I'm not one of those who says, woe is the players. Those guys get the best medical care in the world. Mm-hmm. They get unbelievable academic support, tutoring, which they should, because they're so busy playing football. They're fed like kings. There's so many things, and they get their education paid for. And everybody says, well, that doesn't equate to what they should make, because their school's making millions of dollars. And I agree with all that, but it's not like they don't get anything. And I think if you're smart enough to go there, get your degree, stay out of trouble, do what you're asked to do. A kid at Clemson, a kid at Alabama, a kid at Ohio State, they're always going to be able to go back and have tons of opportunities if football doesn't work out. And how many of these kids ever play professional football? Percentage of them. And I think NIL, in theory, makes a lot of sense, because if you're a linebacker who starts for 2 or 3 years for Clemson and you got a chance to make $100,000 a year, let's just use that as a ballpark figure, and you're there, and so you're picking up $300,000. Well, that's going to help you as you get out of college. If you never play it down in the NFL, that's going to help you. And if you've earned that, if you've gotten on campus and you earn a starting job and you're a productive contributor to that team, then you ought to be able to get some money. I think that's what most people agree on, right? What they don't agree on is what's happening now and what was always going to happen. And that NIL, name, image, and likeness, a player capitalizing on his name, image, and likeness, was going to become a bidding process for players out of high school. And probably most important, and this is the thing that coaches hate the most, Larry, and you know it, is now that the portal is wide open, it is essentially free agency, and it's wide open. There are no rules, there are no ramifications. Everyone tampers. I say everyone. Most people tamper. Every kid gets in the portal. They have an attorney. They have an agent. You go read on our site or anybody else's site where a kid's quoted as talking about it. Well, that's set up by that kid's agent. Mm-hmm. That he's got chances to go to Texas or Tennessee or Michigan to visit. All that is run by some quote unquote NIL attorney or agent. That's what drives coaches crazy, because you're constantly having to re-recruit your kids, and they're saying, hey, coach, I got a chance to go visit school X, school Y, coach, and school Z, and each one of them is offering me this deal and that deal and this deal. Now, is any of that real? Is part of it real? Is none of it real? That's what's sort of making it so difficult right now to really manage rosters and keep any kind of uniformity within the sport and with your team.
Yeah, we just had last week on the podcast, his name is C.D. Davies. He heads up Clemson's recently sort of reconfigured collective. It's called the 110 Society. And that's his thing. And I know, it's funny. You hear every school out there, according to them, it's like, oh, well, we're doing it the right way. And everybody else is, you never hear anybody say, oh, yeah, we're tampering, or yeah, we're doing actual pay for play. It's everybody gnashing their teeth over other schools, not their own. But I think the record is pretty, I guess, fairly convincing that Clemson is more reluctant, with their culture of, Dabo has said, we don't want to lead with NIL. We want, we don't want NIL to be the reason that players come here, but we don't want it to be, we don't want it to be the reason they leave. So in essence, when you're recruiting a high school guy, the big thing that they roll out during the recruitment is more about the holistic parts of it. We're going to help your kid become a man, and when he's 30, he's going to have a job and this and that. And the type of, normally the player if his first question is, as a recruit, is, what kind of deal can you give me? That's sounds like a dog is kind of interested in some NIL.
He's getting pretty upset about what you're talking about right now. He's not a believer.
Sounds like a First Take or Stephen A. Anyway,
barking dog.
We could go a long way with that.
Who could bark the loudest, right?
But it's more like if the player comes in as a recruit, saying the first question is, what kind of deal can you give me? Relationship's probably not going to go very far with Dabo and Clemson, versus if a player comes in and establishes himself on the field and then he gets approached by somebody else or tampered with, then it's like, okay, we don't want to lose you. We'll work to try to get you a better deal. But one of the things that C.D. Davies talked about last week was, it's fairly common to have a recruit or a player say, yeah, this school A is offering me this. And the first question he asks is, do you have it in writing? And it's usually no, because it can't be in writing. And so you've got to be really careful at what they're saying you'll make, because that often is not perhaps what you're actually going to get. There's a lot more to it.
Yeah. No, there's not a lot of easy answers. And I don't think it's probably not fair to lump it all in one cookie cutter issue. I think some schools are doing it the right way. Some schools are cheating their rear ends off. And then there's those schools in the middle. I know this, it's hard, and I think Clemson and Dabo are finding this out. It's hard now to stay at an elite level unless you're pretty aggressive in the NIL world, collective world. It just is. I mean, because the large majority of kids are going to want to know. They're going to want to know what kind of deal they can get. They're going to want to be paid comparable money to, if I'm a great linebacker or edge rusher at Clemson, then I sure say, kids all talk. We talk in the media, right? I mean, they know what someone's allegedly making or supposedly making at North Carolina or Tennessee or Florida State. And if they're just as productive and they're not making that kind of cash, and again, the hard part is you don't know what's real and what's fantasy. But you've got to be pretty aggressive in that world, I think, now, to be an elite program. Now, will it change down the road? Is it sustainable? All those are questions that, you hear. I don't know. And I certainly don't have any faith that Congress is going to be able to figure it out. To me, that's a pipe dream. but it's just where we are right now. And Dabo has been very consistent. I've talked to him about it, that he is not going to change the way he runs his program. He's not going to bid for players. He's not going to get into the, trying to entice players to come to Clemson from other schools. If people reach out, certainly he's going to listen. He still hasn't taken many transfers. He has had some guys leave over this year, but he's just he's a firm believer that his system works. Granted, they didn't have a great year this year, and everybody's going to point to that and say, well, see, Dabo's getting left behind. Well, I don't think you can truly assess any of this, Larry. What works, what doesn't work. Is this a disaster? Is it going to get any better? Is it sustainable? I don't think we have a big enough body of work yet in the NIL transfer world to really make some hard and fast judgments. It's all new to everybody. Let's see where we are 2-3 years from now, and I think then you have a better idea of what's what.
Yeah, and I agree. And one of the sort of layers to that is, as you're talking about that sort of the temptation for just to judge right away and to, that's just where we are in our sort of public conversation about everything. Back in late September when Clemson played Florida State in the regular season, it was viewed as, okay, this is maybe could be viewed as a referendum, between two highly contrasting styles of roster construction and management in Norvell, who was, the portal king, and then Dabo, who's the, I guess, the leader in portal abstinence, so to speak. Not abstinence, but just more, not as, I think it's fair to say, not as aggressive. Well, Florida State wins that game in Death Valley, and it seemed like every game-changing play they made was made by someone who they got from the portal. So, yeah, probably fair to say, man, this is maybe not a this is maybe perhaps a mark against Dabo's philosophy. But if you fast forward to the present, you just look at what's going on elsewhere. If you're in Dabo's shoes, and you look at Florida State, they just got hammered last week by the NCAA. You look at, I don't know, Michigan, like they're, I'm guessing they're going to have to vacate something at some point. You look at the GOAT who just retired, and I'd be shocked if a part of what was pushing him away was not some of this, the transactional nature of things with a procession of your own players coming to you. Whereas, traditionally you're used to telling the player, all right, this is what you got to do. The pros and the cons, the constructive criticism, and you're the coach and he's got to conform to what you do. To now, the frequency of players who are like, hey man, I need a better deal, or I need more touches, or whatever. And this is not me yelling at clouds. It's just the reality. Is it logical, getting back to the referendum thing, to then say, well, hey, maybe this is a check mark for Dabo's way, because I don't think he has near the frequency of guys coming into his office, even though of course he has some, saying, hey, I need a better deal, coach, or I need this or that. Does that all that make sense to you?
Yeah, I would say Dabo, when he meets with these guys, is pretty upfront about, listen, if you're coming here to get a big deal, we're probably not for you. If you're coming here to, better yourself, to get a degree, to have a chance to go play in the NFL, because Dabo's track record's pretty good of sending guys to the NFL. It has been. And once you get here and earn it, we have a really good collective, and you're going to have your chances to make money. I'd say that's his approach, but now that's not everybody's approach. And yeah, I would agree that if a guy gets there and the first thing he wants to know is, hey coach, now it's going to take this in the first year, that in the second year, he's probably not going to be one that's at the top of Clemson's board. But I still think that they're going to recruit guys that they feel like they need to win at the highest level. And will they, just like the NFL people do, will they mark guys off the board because they just don't feel like they're going to fit in their culture, or there's check marks against them, or in the case you're talking about, that's all they're talking about is money and deals? Yeah, I think that absolutely happens at Clemson with Dabo. And I repeat what I said a minute ago. I'm not ready to point my finger at this school or that school, or a way someone's doing it versus a way they're not doing it, and saying, all right, here's the poster child for the way it's going to be in football going forward, and here's the way you can't do it. Because I just don't think, again, we have enough of a body of work. If Clemson continues to hover around 8 wins over the next couple of years, then yeah, that's probably enough evidence that they're just not going to be able to compete unless they change their philosophy. But again, I don't know if what we see now is really truly sustainable. Are people going to continue to give the kind of money to collectives that we're seeing paid out? I mean, I've heard stories now of schools that are way out over their skis on what they have in their collectives versus what they have promised recruits and what they've said, hey, we can give you this. We just saw a kid from Texas A&M, one of the top-rated defensive linemen in the country 2 years ago, Walter Nolan, transferred to Ole Miss. Well, he put something out there, I don't know if you saw it, on Twitter, and I think another kid that went to A&M said the same thing, Evan Stewart, saying, you better read your contracts really close if you go to A&M.
I did not see that.
You're not getting what they say you're getting. So are we going to see more of that going down the road? Probably. You know, you got the Rashada kid, that whole story at Florida last year. So I think there's more of this to come. And I would encourage any kid who's a really good player and a prospect, get that contract, have somebody read it over and see what's fact and what's fiction, and sort of go from there. But I tell you what I don't agree with. I've heard some fans and some coaches, because most people in the media are all for players getting everything they can. So what if they transfer 1 million times? So what if they're being bought out of high school? And that's just, I'm not necessarily like that. But what I disagree with from what some fans have said is it's going to ruin the sport. We're not going to watch anymore. Well, Larry, there were more people watching college football this year than ever before.
Yep.
TV ratings were way up there. People love college football. And they may not like some of the things that are happening, or they may be old school or get off my lawn type of people. I've been accused of that sometimes. But they still love college football. It is intertwined with American society, certainly in the South and in the Midwest. And they're not going to quit watching. And I don't care how many times people bellyache and complain about it. They're going to continue watching because there's generations of families who've gone to see Clemson play, granddads and fathers and sons, and next door neighbors and people you go to church with. And that's just sort of what it's part of the fabric of college football. To me, it's what makes it so special. And I think when you look at the hard numbers, the TV ratings, how many people went to games, now it's more expensive than ever to go to a college football game. But people are going to all of a sudden quit paying attention and quit watching. That to me, that's never going to change.
I mean, what's the age-old thing you hear from fans, long predating the era that we're currently in? Like, a Clemson fan would say, oh, I'd watch Georgia and Clemson play tiddlywinks. They're going to keep watching. They might not like every aspect of it, but they're going to keep watching and going to games, I believe.
Yeah, and I think it's changed. Every game's on TV now. I do think there's people who don't go to games now that maybe used to.
Yep.
As you get a little older, as it gets more expensive to go for a family. I mean, for a family of 4, if you want to sit down on the lower deck at Clemson or Tennessee or Georgia or Alabama, and you're a family of 4, that's a pretty heavy expenditure. And if you've got a 16-inch big screen at your house, that's a lot easier. And I think that's why, as we start to talk about the future of college football, fans are going to want more good games. And I mean, my theory, and not everybody agrees with it, but my theory is we're moving at some point. I can't give you a time frame to one big conglomerate of college football, and it's going to be the haves. And is that 32 teams? Is it 42? Is it 48? I mean, I don't know. And it's going to be separate from the NCAA. They'll have a commissioner. They'll have their own playoff. They'll have their own governance. Players will have representation to be able to get their piece of the pie, and probably negotiations that change or contracts that are set up from, I don't know what type of windows or periods, but much like the NFL, it'll be the NFL model. And you'll have the same, they'll get paid, and you'll have the same, well, we're not going to watch. It's too much like the NFL. Yeah, they will watch, because you know why? You're going to have one week Clemson's going to play Texas. The next week they're going to play NC State.
Mm-hmm.
The next week they're going to play Tennessee. The next week they're going to play Virginia Tech. They're going to be good games every week. It's going to be an NFL type model. And yes, the smaller schools, the FCS schools, certainly the schools that are, like a Wofford or a Furman that count on those games. If they go play Clemson or South Carolina and they get big wads of money to do that, that's going to really kill them. And I think if you start having to pay, the other part of this conversation, we could talk about this for hours. If schools start having to pay all this money for players, and we go that one, then sports are going to get cut. There's just no way around it. Sports are going to start. The smaller sports are going to get cut. I mean, you tell me, Cal and Stanford, and by the way, Stanford has one of the probably most well-rounded athletic departments in the country. I mean, they compete for championships, and outside of football and certainly in Olympic sports, in just about every sport. But you got SMU, and you got Cal, and you got Stanford coming to the ACC. You got Washington, Oregon going to the Big Ten. Now, I know they've said they're setting up ways to sort of make this happen where travel is not as dicey. But how do you, if you're Oregon and you're playing Maryland in a three-game baseball series, in early March or middle of March or whatever, you tell me what that's going to be like for, quote unquote, the well-being, and you've heard this, the well-being of the student athlete. Is that for the well-being of the student athlete? No, it's all about money. So I still think football is going to break off. And I think because of what we're talking about, and then schools can sort of, if you're basketball, if you're baseball, if you're women's softball, you play schools more in your region, more in your geographical location. And then football will be sort of its own entity.
Well, and that's the most mindless part of where things are headed, and what we've done so far is that the right sequence of events, if smart people are orchestrating everything and it's not every man for himself, this survivalist sort of approach from everybody, then you preserve the conference framework because that is what is geographically friendly to the smaller sports, so they can travel, right? And then you let your big boys go have their own football conglomeration. But what we're doing is we're destroying the conferences first. And so then what are the smaller sports left to do? Like, to compete? Who are they left to compete with? It's just it's insane. It's all for self-preservation. Yeah.
For these schools that, they're worried about, why is Florida State trying to get out of the ACC? They're worried they're going to get left behind.
Yeah.
Why is Oregon and Washington moving across the country, quote unquote, to the Big Ten? It's all about self-preservation, so they can continue, their athletic departments can continue to stay healthy and thrive. And that sort of is a big part of school. And to me, the hypocrisy is this. And I get it. If you're trying to do what's best for your school and your athletic department. But Larry, I don't want to hear another time a president or a chairman sitting in his office in his sort of three-piece suit, with smoking a pipe, saying that what we do here is we're educators and we do what's best for our student athletes, and we're never going to put them in any position where we're doing something that's not fair to them. That's a bunch of BS. And you know it, and I know it, and they know it. It's all about what can we do to fiscally and financially stay afloat and continue to make a lot of money. And if people say we don't make money, look at where do the salaries come from for coaches? Well, they come from TV, they come from donations. All that's part of, college sports. And I'm a junkie. I love college football. I love all college sports, but presidents and chancellors and people in those committees kick this can down the road now for 20 years on paying players. Like it was just going to magically go away. Well, it was never going to go away. They had no plan for it. No one had any foresight. There was nobody. There were no forward-thinking people. There were not enough football-centric people involved in those committees to say, "Hey, guys, this is what's going to happen." You know, they didn't believe it. That, yeah, well, sure, these guys should benefit on name, image, and likeness, which they should. But the stupidity and the naivety to think that this was not going to become part of the recruiting process, which I've talked to people who were in those rooms or part of those conversations, is asinine.
Yeah.
It was always going to become part of the recruiting process.
It's wild. You know, getting back to the fans, the idea of fans having to foot the bill, a lot of the bill for NIL is crazy. And I think that sort of hits on part of what you're talking about. You know, you had 20 years to sort of figure this out. And I would even put some of this on the universities themselves, because these new oceans of revenue came forth in the form of TV multimedia deals over the last, about a decade or so, decade plus. And
yep.
I remember writing like, okay, this money's great and all, but they need to do something for the fans. You need to give the fans a break. But the fans have gotten no break. Instead, even pre-NIL, it was, my ticket, you know, the cost of just having the right to buy a ticket is going up. Oh, the ticket prices are going up. Oh, the parking, all this and that. And it's not proportional or commensurate, usually, I don't think, with their increases in income and discretionary spending. And so then now, in the middle of a process where it seems like almost everyone involved in the process is getting enriched significantly, coaches, administrators, now players, fans have to foot another part of the bill. And it's like, you know, the guy that I talked to last week, C.D. Davies, said that he detects what he called donor exhaustion, not just at Clemson, but everywhere. And it's totally justifiable. You agree?
No, I do think, and you know, I said a minute ago, let's see where we are 2-3 years down the road and then assess everything. I think that's a part of it, because I think this is right. And your guest last week probably has a lot more insight than I do. I think right now, if you're donating to collective, that's not tax deductible.
Mm-hmm.
I
don't think it is anymore.
So if I'm a guy that owns my business and I'm donating for, there's a fund there to build a new basketball practice facility or to improve the locker room, you know, the women's basketball locker room or both teams' basketball locker room. And, you know, I think if you're donating to that, I think that fund, the Clemson fund or the Georgia fund, then that is tax deductible. But are you going to do that and continue to donate money to the collective to provide players with money and name, image, and likeness? I think that's one of those questions. And again, let's see how that plays out over the next year or two. I like that phrase, donor fatigue. I think there is that. I think you're starting to hear that more and more. And that doesn't mean that donor's not going to go watch the games or still be a part of going to see the games, but anteing up the kind of money that it's going to take now to sort of continue to play that NIL game at the level that some of these schools are. I think more and more guys and gals who give that kind of money are going to sit there and think long and hard about it, whether they want to and whether they can. You know, are you going to give, you know, a couple $100,000 every year to the collective so they can help buy players? I mean, I don't know. I guess we're going to find out. That's why I think, Larry, people say inside, you know, athletic departments and coaches and even in universities, they suggest that this model is not sustainable, and because of what you're talking about. And I guess we're going to find out. You know, and maybe a guy like Tyler from Spartanburg decides instead of giving $300,000 next year, he's only going to give $200,000.
Oh man, that's a good transition into the big story last week. I guess if first we could, I'm just fascinated by your role and your ability to be able to break a lot of news across college football. A lot of that, of course, is based on relationships you have with the various folks involved. But this was obviously a massive story, and 20 years from now, I'll remember where I was when I saw your tweet on that Wednesday mid to late afternoon. I was sitting on my couch in my basement, and it was almost like I didn't believe what I just saw, that you said he was about to go into a meeting and tell his team he was hanging it up. Can you give any kind of window into just behind the curtain, obviously only what you're comfortable with, but just how you position yourself to be able to get that, to be able to get something that, gosh, hundreds of media people across the country would die to have, because that's not just the product of something that just happens in a day. It's a product of years worth of building a relationship or relationships plural, I should say. So if you don't mind, just take me back to that monumental day and what sort of led up to it, just from your recollections and your insight.
The short answer would be that I've been around a while, and I've had a chance to get to know Nick Saban and a lot of people that he's close to. And that program, I spent a lot of time with the last 17 years covering Alabama because they've been so good. And there's been one coach there. See, that's the difference, Larry, is they've had, much like Clemson and Dabo, they've had one coach. Now, they've had a lot of turnover on their coaching staff, but internally, there are a lot of the same people are there that have been there for a long time. And, when you have a chance to get to know somebody over a period of years like that, especially when you're in the national media, because listen, everybody, schools and coaches and administrators always want stuff out there nationally. I'm not naive to that. And, if I were working at, the Birmingham newspaper, or, I probably wouldn't have as much of a chance to get that story. So I'm realistic when it comes to that. But I just think having those relationships and been around for a while and getting to know people, I had a little bit of a heads up that he was seriously considering it this year. I still, at the end of the day, I really wondered down deep if he would do it, if he'd pull the trigger. Each of the last 2 years, I know he's left Tuscaloosa after the season and gone and talked about it with his wife and discussed it, whether this was the time. And I sort of got a little heads up that, this time it's pretty serious. And then found out that morning that he was going to do it unless he changed his mind. And the crazy thing with Nick Saban is, he's never going to tip his hand to anybody there in the building. He's interviewing coaches and talking to players and doing his normal routine all the way up until he goes in to tell his team he's retiring. So, I had an inkling that was getting ready to happen, and just was sort of ready. He's so old school that the most important thing to him, and he didn't tell me this, but others around him told me this, is he did not want this to get out before he told his team. Mm-hmm. That was the most important thing to him. So he wanted to be the one to tell his players that he was retiring. He didn't want to read it on Twitter. He didn't want to see it on the bottom scroll at ESPN. He didn't want to see it, or of course he never looks at Twitter. He just didn't want to get out there for public consumption before he told them. And once he told them, and it was very short, I don't think it was quite 10 minutes, and then he turned it over to the AD to talk to him there in the team meeting room, is when, I got word that he had indeed told his team. And that was, again, it says a lot about him. And it says a lot about a lot of coaches, period, not just Nick Saban, is they always want to be able to tell their team. It's hard to do that, Larry, in this day and age, as you know, because stuff gets out there so fast. Kalen DeBoer wasn't able to tell his team
right
before it got out that he was going to Alabama to replace Saban. But it's rare that happens. But for him, he kept it so quiet, and there was such a tight circle of people who knew. And I can tell you, I was talking to people on Monday that once he got back, people that have been around that staff and that building for a while, and they were like, I don't, he certainly, if he's retiring, he certainly hasn't let on, or he's not acting like it. He's sort of doing everything the way he's always doing it. So there are a bunch of people, I think most people in that building, I won't say were shocked, but they were caught off guard when they went in there in that team meeting and he told them that. His AD wasn't. He'd been given some notice so he could start working off his list, which any good AD already has a list, right? And then you're sort of, all right, I don't know how many days he had, but I need to really get my current list up to date, start doing some behind the scenes work just to be ready. And I think Greg Byrne was ready. I think he knew the 2 or 3 guys right off the bat that he wanted to really zero in on. And because I think Nick was going to do that, was going to give him that type of heads up, to the AD, because you never want to get caught flat-footed. Nor should any good AD ever get caught flat-footed in this day and age, right? Especially when you got a guy like Saban, who is fairly close to retirement. You should always be ready, and I think Byrne was ready to go make that next hire.
Do you have any kind of guess on how much of a heads up Byrne had?
I bet you he knew when they went into the postseason that Nick was going to think long and hard after the season whether the time was right. I would say he knew, he knew that was a real possibility. And then of course when they went to, they played on. Let's see, I was out there January 1st, went back home the next day, had a team meeting the day or early that next morning, and then Saban was around for a while. And then he went to his home with his wife in Florida for 4 days. And I would say once he got back, he had told Byrne that's what he was, unless he changed his mind, that's what he was going to do. So I think Greg Byrne had, I don't know, a month, couple weeks to really start doing his due diligence on who he wanted, who was realistic. Check stuff like buyouts, Larry, just things that probably your average fan, even the media, sometimes you don't think about. Well, what's Dan Lanning's buyout? What's Kalen DeBoer's buyout? What's Dabo Swinney? Who are the guys that I absolutely don't want because of various reasons? Maybe background checks they've done before, things they know about in a coach's past. And then you have your board. I guess it's much like a recruiting board, right? You have your board right there in front of you. And you circle the 4 guys. Who can we realistically get? Who do I want? Who do I like the best? Who's a good the word fit's used a lot, but who do we think can best come in here and handle the scrutiny of replacing Nick Saban? See, that's the thing that, for me, everybody says, well, they could have got this guy or that guy, or this guy would be great. Well, there are a lot of people that don't want to be part of that. Let's take a guy like, let's take Dabo, let's take Dan Lanning, guys that have, now that's 2 sort of ends of the spectrum. Dabo's been there for a long time. He's won 2 championships there. He can pretty much do what he wants to. He's got it set up the way he wants it set up. He loves living in that part of the country, loves living there at Clemson. And then you got Dan Lanning, who's been at Oregon for 2 years, and has and within 2 years made Oregon a national power. He's got Phil Knight. He's got all the resources he wants. He's getting ready to go into the Big Ten. So all those factors, as you start to look at who you want to be the next coach, and by the way, he's got a $22 million buyout. If you're an AD, these are all the things sort of you're looking at. Who's realistic? Do you want a guy that's under 40? Do you want a guy that's been a head coach for a long time? Dan Lanning has only been a head coach for 2 years. DeBoer, I think, has been one down for 9, and he's done it at every level. He was at NAIA and then Division II. He was at Fresno State, and within 2 years at Washington, he got the Huskies to the national championship game. And as you're starting to go down your list and put that list together and finalize it, all these are factors that you're looking at. But I think pretty quickly, the 2 guys that Greg Byrne had zeroed in on were DeBoer and Mike Norvell. I think those are the two guys that they talked to.
Upstate foodies, want to take a moment to talk to you about our favorite taco spot, Willie Taco. 5 locations across the upstate. This award-winning team has been serving up fresh taco fusion for a solid decade now. The chefs at Willie Taco utilize the freshest, most creative, and sometimes unexpected ingredients in their kitchens. Come see why Southern Living, Garden and Gun, and Food and Wine Magazine are raving about Willie Taco and their signature offerings, such as their Southern Tide, crispy avocado, Nashville hot chicken tacos, literally flavors you will not find anywhere else, folks. And don't forget about the cocktails, super fresh margaritas, ice cold cerveza, and over 80 tequilas served up daily from behind the bar. So don't wait, folks. Your Willie Taco Familia is ready to serve you up their twist on funky, fresh fusion. It's the Willie way. Another loyal supporter of the Dubcast is Blackacre Law Firm in Greenville, a subsidiary of Parham Smith and Archambault. Blackacre helps South Carolina residents achieve their dreams of home ownership by providing experienced professional representation for real estate closings. Attention to detail is crucial in real estate law. Blackacre is committed to making sure nothing gets by them preparing residential or commercial closings. Blackacre also offers estate planning services for their clients in the Greenville area. Find out more about Blackacre at 864-326-3507. Want to share a quick word about Founders Federal Credit Union? If you've been to a sporting event in Clemson, you've probably heard about Founders already. They are the official credit union partner of the Clemson Tigers. In addition to that, all Clemson faculty, staff, and students are eligible for membership as well as IPTAY members. Its office is located beside the Walmart Neighborhood Market on Old Greenville Highway in Clemson. For more information, go to foundersfcu.com. Can we go back to Wednesday morning, sort of to your process, and putting everybody in your shoes when you get that sort of tip? I think I know the answer to this, but the general listener probably doesn't because they're not in this business. Can you just sort of give some insight into decision-making, strategy? Like, okay, you get this tip. What is keeping you from putting a report out there saying Nick Saban is considering or could retire or is leaning toward retirement? What makes you wait until it... I mean, you've already explained it. He wants to tell his team first. But I just want to maybe go a little deeper into some of the strategy that's involved there and sort of sitting on it. I mean, I know exactly why, just from the sort of the feel that you have for those situations. But I don't know, just to maybe share some insight into that, if you don't mind.
Well, I mean, total transparency. I didn't have all day. I had probably 2 hours. Hey, are you, where are you today? Where are you going to be? And I'm like, and that was probably about, 2 hours maybe.
Wow.
But to answer your question, even if I'd put it out that Nick Saban, is considering retirement, and then he doesn't, then that probably doesn't put me in the best light, because things change, man. You know that. Coach searches and guys leaving versus not leaving. Coach is going to leave, going to retire, and not retire. I mean, I've had millions of stories on hiring a coach or a coach thinking about retiring where they changed their mind at the last minute. And that was a part of it. And then part of doing this is there's always a little bit of give and take. Mm-hmm. And I knew, again, that if he did indeed go through it and retire, that he wanted to tell his players first. And I knew I had a better chance of, if you're going to get that, you probably need to play ball a little bit. Because, it's like saying, well, this coach or Clemson's likely to leave the ACC. And Larry Williams got a great source telling you that. But it's also sort of fluid too, and it might change. Are you going to throw that out there? Sometimes it's better to wait in our business and make sure the sausage is made before you say, hey, this sausage is made, it's ready to be served, than to throw something out there while it's being made. Because there's some things can change, and I think that's part of it as a journalist. And listen, the two of us have talked during many situations. you're constantly wrestling with that. When's the time to go with it versus when you know something's done? And because I never want to, let's just say, for example, I threw out there, sources are telling ESPN that Nick Saban's considering retirement, strongly considering retirement. Well, number one, that's not a huge revelation. I think most people knew that he was closer to retiring as opposed to not. He's going to be 73 next football season. And he sort of, I think you sort of knew that. So that's number one. Number two, if you throw that out there and he doesn't, then again, looking at it from my perspective, then what's the way people are going to remember that is, well, Chris Lowe reported that he was considering retirement and he didn't. Well, Chris Lowe, he was wrong, or he had bad sources, or he jumped the gun. So I guess I'm just a little bit more conservative, I would say. I want to make sure you get it right. Back when Fred Flintstone was really a real person and Barney Rubble, and I was in J school, journalism school, I can remember a professor always saying, hey, if your mom tells you she loves you, you better get it from a second source before you write it.
So, okay, the 2 hours after you get the heads up, I've been in some similar situations, and I know with me, man, that is hard, the waiting, because you're like, all right, I kind of feel like I'm the only one who knows this now, but is somebody else going to find out? Is this going to get out? Am I not going to have this first? And we don't live for, having every single thing first. Like, it's not the end of the world, but it is it's a big part of our job, right? So I'm just curious, You're such a veteran at all this stuff. When you get a tip and you're sort of just playing the waiting game on such a monstrous story, are you nervous? Or are you just sort of at peace? Or like, just give me, what is that like?
No, not at peace, because you're right. I mean, the AD could have told somebody in Nick's family, his daughter or son could have told a friend of theirs, hey, Dad's retired today. And they go on Twitter and people, there's fake accounts out there. I mean, unfortunately, there's fake social media accounts. And I think people had hinted at it all year or even the year before. So I wouldn't say I was at peace, but I knew that I had a really good feeling that if he didn't change his mind, that I would get it. If not, minutes in our business can be pretty critical. But, I really don't, Larry, get hung up on this. And maybe I'm in the minority. If I get it and I get it from somebody I trust, I put it out there. I'm not scouring the internet or scouring Twitter. I guess it's X now, to see if you had it a minute before or anybody else had it a minute before. Even like when I put it out there, I didn't know for sure that I was the first one.
Right.
Now, I knew in my phone and I had 260 messages within like 15 minutes that I probably was. But I promise you, I did not go when I got word that he had told his team, because think about it, kids, his players in the room, they all have Twitter. They're all on Twitter. They could easily, hey, I'm sitting here with Coach Saban right now, and he's saying, or they could call their roommate or their dad or somebody they know, maybe in the media. Coach Saban's telling us right now he's retiring. And the immediacy of everything right now has changed, and our world's changed everything. But I swear, man, I do not go on Twitter and look and see, all right, has Larry reported this? Has Sports Illustrated? Has Yahoo? I get it. I go with it. And I know in our business, man, it's sort of crazy. Everybody's worried about, well, this person had it 2 minutes before that person. Or this person sometimes had it a minute or 5 minutes or whatever. Larry Williams was first on this. I think that's the silliest thing in the world, because who are the only ones that keep up with that note?
Media.
That's exactly right. The people that are on Twitter and social media. So those of us, we're the only one that knows if someone had it 2 minutes or 10 minutes or 1 minute. And I think that's one of the dumbest things in our profession. And I've done this for almost 40 years. that we all get caught up in. And I've been guilty of that too. Okay. I'm not pointing this finger at everybody else, but nobody knows at the end of the day. And there's so much time and effort spent. Well, I think I've even asked you before. I think you've had something on a Clemson, and I've said, "Hey, did you have this first, or when did you have this?"
Yep.
And because I don't know, and the reality is now with so many other team sites out there covering specific teams, like they're at Clemson, a lot of times you have 3 different, sometimes 4 different websites or team sites that cover a school, and you guys your board is behind a paywall, right?
Yep.
I mean, so if I'm Larry Williams and I'm working for Tiger Illustrated, I'm not giving stuff out for free. Why would you?
Right.
You know, so you might have something on your message board that Clemson's hiring, you know, whomever to be their defensive coordinator or offensive coordinator, you know, and you had it before anybody, and it's on your message board because you want your subscribers to be the ones that know first, that's the way it should be. Well, I don't necessarily know that. Same with, you know, Ohio State, their message board. So sometimes, you know, again, we're sort of getting in the weeds here. If I'm looking around to see, well, who had this first? Well, you know what? Ross Dellinger at Yahoo had it 2 minutes ago, you know, or even, you know, on my staff, Pete Thamel had it 4 minutes ago. And I say, well, and I'm not a huge tweeter unless it's news or it's hard news. And I'll say, you know, whatever, you know, Ryan Day has hired Bill O'Brien to be his offensive coordinator. You know, such and such had it first. I can't tell you the number of times that I have done that. And I try not to get into the weeds with that, but I do try to be fair that I've had someone call me or text me that covers that team on a team website, sort of like your site, and say, hey, we actually had that 20 minutes ago. Or we had that last night. Mm-hmm. Maybe not last night. That's probably not a good example because it wouldn't hold, you know, but you know, we wrote that. We had an exclusive story 15 or 20 or 30 minutes ago. Well, I wouldn't know that. So again, the reason I tell that story is I think it's silly that we get caught up in trying to figure out who had it first, because at the end of the day, you really don't know who had it first with all the different media now that exist, and certainly the team site media, because you guys are the ones that almost always are first or right there close to the top of reporting the nuts and bolts of a team.
And I think the broader lesson, Chris, just for the sake of working, is you keep your head down and you work. You know, you don't sit there and spend 13 hours a day in the conversation, because what does that give you? Like, how is that productive? How is that constructive? How does that help you do your job versus spending your time with your head down, talking to people privately, you know, trying to figure out what's really going on. So I think whereas you might lose something by not every now and then not knowing who has something first, I think you gain 500% more by not being in the cesspool or echo chamber that is Twitter and all that stuff. So I think I agree with your philosophy. Let's get
my gauge is always, this is the last thing I'll say. My gauge has always been this, is when I report something, or if I'm Larry Williams and report something, or if I'm Mark Schlabach and report something, or Pete Thamel and I report something, you know, what I want the reaction to be is, well, I saw something out there a minute ago, or I saw something out there 20 minutes ago, but if Larry Williams is reporting it, I know it's right.
Yes.
You know, he's going to do his due diligence. He's going to talk to people directly involved, and I know that's right. That's always been my gauge, is I want to, when I report something, you know, I want people to know that it's right. And I'm not guessing. I'm not quoting a guy down the street who has a brother who once dated a girl who knew the head coach. That's always been the thing that I have in my mind before I press the button on a story, that I know that I've talked to the people I needed to talk to, and this is 100% right.
Whatever the exhilaration of getting a big scoop or whatever, the far more profound impact is felt on the negative side. The memory of when you missed on something, got something wrong. That's what fuels me. I'm paranoid of being wrong. And I think you're probably in the same boat.
Absolutely. That's what keeps me up at night. I still do it. And if I report something and I know it's right, but nobody says anything, or the school doesn't confirm it, or they're telling other media, well, no, nothing's been decided on that. I mean, you've been in that boat before. Nothing's been decided on that. That during that interim, man, you're like, oh, your heart. Again, this is our 39th year in the business. You're just sitting there thinking, gosh, did I miss something? Did this change somehow in the last 20 minutes or 30 minutes? But it's like a coach. I mean, how many coaches have you talked to that tell you they remember the losses a whole hell of a lot more than they remember the wins?
All right, we got to get into the Dabo angle of the Alabama story. Thursday, I guess, let's see, that Friday, 2 days after Saban's retirement, we reported that Alabama had reached out to Dabo the morning after the retirement, so Thursday morning. And I have reason to believe it was Saban actually who called him to ask, hey, how would you be interested? How open would the door be? And it's just fascinating on a lot of levels, because I'm only standing on what I reported. I'm not making any conclusions, right? I'm not saying, Dabo turned him down, I'm also not saying, he had zero shot. There's no way they would have hired him. I don't know. I have no idea. Like, had he said, yes, I'm interested, let's take it to second base, it would be crazy for me to put it past him to be able to go into a room and sell himself and his vision to folks representing his alma mater. So I'm just curious. I mean, like you already said, the first two names apparently on Byrne's list were Norvell and DeBoer. The sense that I get from the Tuscaloosa side of things is that maybe Byrne wasn't all too enamored of some of his, I don't want to say baggage, but maybe some of the theatrics and antics, the Tyler from Spartanburg stuff, maybe makes you wonder about, can he handle can he handle something here that's like Clemson times 100? And then we're not even getting into the NIL portal sort of perceptions. So I'm just curious for your take on Dabo's sort of being contacted and how far it could have gone had Dabo maybe been expressed a little more interest. And I mean, it's just it's a fascinating part of the storyline, just given all the context there with Dabo and Alabama and Saban and all.
All those examples you just gave, all the things you just discussed, I'm told were absolutely part of the vetting process or part of the reasoning that Greg Byrne did not want to go down that road. Not that he didn't think Dabo was a great coach and had done a lot of, look at what he's done, his track record. But I think all the things you just mentioned were part of it. I'm also told, like you, by someone very close to Dabo, that there was some contact. I don't know 100% that it was Nick Saban, but what you reported, I would certainly not be floored, because those two have a very good relationship. There's respect. They used to own homes right there near each other, I think in the Boca Grande area in Florida. I think they had some meals together down there. They used to have that sort of standing bet that if whoever won or whoever lost had to pay dinner for the next time they went down there to their home. So I know that those two had a really good rapport. So if Nick called him, and again, I have no reason to think that he didn't, then I would think that he was doing it just to sort of check and see. Because you're crazy if you're Greg Byrne or anybody at Alabama if you don't use Nick Saban as a resource.
Right.
And hey, who have you coached against, or who have you recruited against, or who do you know in their profession that you think it could come in here and continue to win at a high level? So I do think, well, again, I haven't talked to the same probably the same people you have, but I have talked to somebody very close to Dabo who said that there was someone who reached out. I've also talked to somebody that I trust, that not necessarily Greg Byrne, but somebody else there in the Alabama inner circle reached out to Mike Loxley at Maryland about his interest in the job. Again, not necessarily that it was Greg Byrne, because I'm told it was not Greg Byrne. So in coach searches, that happens sometimes. Influential donors, boosters. Hey, would you be up to coming? If you do, I think maybe I could talk to Byrne, or maybe we can sort of lean on him a little bit. And I'm not saying that Saban was saying he was going to lean on Greg Byrne if Dabo said he wanted to come, but that's just sort of the way coach searches, especially at a place like Alabama. That's the way it goes sometimes. And if you're Greg Byrne, he's in a tough spot. He needed to get somebody he felt like that he could work with, someone that he felt like could come in and continue to win at a high level. And I think the big thing with him is he wanted someone that had the right mindset and a mentality and disposition that they're going to be able to put up with the incredible scrutiny that now DeBoer is going to be under. I mean, what's going to happen the first time he loses a game? Georgia rolls in there on September 28th, I think. And how do they deal with that? I mean, how is he dealing with what's going on now? They've lost two of their better young players. The top freshman recruit at quarterback has now said he's entering the portal. How does the new coach, because you knew some of that was going to happen, how do they deal with all that? And I think as Byrne sort of waded through all those decisions, and I was told he had sort of had his eye on DeBoer now for a couple of years. Really liked him, and I think all those were factors. But no, Dabo, and people that are really, really close to Dabo have told me for years now that he was not going to leave Clemson, and that he was just too good and just too, it just sort of fits Dabo to a T. Now, the last couple of years, you could sort of hear the frustration in his voice about, hey, we don't need any bandwagon people. Dabo being Dabo, right? All we've done is we've done this, and this. Sort of as you start to hear that frustration, it's only natural that you or me or fans or anybody, administrators at Clemson, are thinking, is he sort of sending smoke signals that, what, maybe I would look to leave. At the end of the day, though, I never felt like Dabo was going to leave. I just didn't, Larry. He's done too much heavy lifting there. So much of his heart, soul, blood, everything is in that program. He's taken that program to heights, and I know they won under Danny there in '81, but he took that program and has taken that program to heights that they never enjoyed, and consistently beating SEC teams, consistently beating up on just about everybody in the ACC, and every once in a while, even in a place like that, I understand that the landscape's changing. You're going to have a year where you're not as good, and this was that year. I mean, last year I always looked at it like they won the ACC, so it's hard to call the 22 season a failure. Mm-hmm. They lost to South Carolina. I know that doesn't sit well with Clemson fans, but they still won the ACC championship. How many games did they win? 11?
Yes, 11, including the ACC championship.
So sometimes you better be careful what you ask for as a fan base. And Dabo is going to bite back. That's just his personality, man. He's never going to change. He's always going to bite back, and he's stubborn as the day is long. But part of those qualities probably have what has made him so successful there at Clemson. He is who he is. But long story short, I never had any information during that whole process that he was a legitimate, realistic candidate to be the next head coach at Alabama. Nor did I have that Lane Kiffin was. Neither one of those I was told would be the head coach at Alabama from people that I trust. And I was told pretty quickly, even though I think Lanning might have sort of halfway been on the list, that to not include him either, that it wasn't going to happen for buyout reasons, the fact he'd only been a head coach for 2 years, and I think Byrne wanted somebody who had been a head coach and had run his shop for longer than that.
Hypothetically, your best guess as to what happens if Dabo says, yeah, let's talk. And then Saban goes to Byrne and says he's interested. And honestly, Greg, I think Dabo's the most qualified to handle everything that there is to handle here. Do you have any guess as to how things might have unfolded from there?
Well, it's, and the coaches love hypotheticals. I know that. If Dabo would have told Nick, hey, I absolutely 100% would love to come back and coach Alabama. I'm on board. Then, I think Nick would have gone to Byrne and said, listen, again, if this is how it all shook out, that I think Dabo is ready. I still don't think, because I don't think Nick's wired to be a guy who's going to push. I mean, everybody said he wanted to name his successor. My conversations with him, he didn't want any part of that. He wanted to be a resource. Hey, reach out to this guy. What do you think about that guy? But I don't think he was going to ever say, this is a guy I think you ought to hire. This is the guy I would hire if I were in your shoes. That's just not Nick. And I think he would have told Byrne, but again, based on what I know, I think Byrne would have gone the direction he did. I really do. I don't think he would have hired Dabo. Again, not because he didn't think he was a great coach, but just at this time, he didn't feel like that was the right way to go. Listen, Lane had some people there, not a lot of people inside, but I know he had some money people who would have loved to have seen him there.
Yeah.
And Larry, I think Lane would have probably done pretty well there.
Yep.
Just if you ask me, total transparency, I think. Now, there are things you got to put up with, Lane. A little bit like Dabo. You're just going to have to accept some things. They're going to be the way they are. But both of those guys have proven. Dabo certainly has been more accomplished than Lane. He's won championships. That they can win at spots. Because, it wasn't like Clemson was a national juggernaut, when he took over. Certainly Ole Miss hasn't been, and Lane's won 10 or more 2 of the last 3 years. But I do think that Lane would have fared pretty well there. Now, how would it have been one of those sort of, huge fireworks that go off and everything's just right and you're winning the big level and then bam, something happens and he's out of there? Possible. Would it have been the same way with Dabo? Come in there, boy, they're still relevant. They're getting the playoff, and then the first time they lose to Ole Miss or lose to Mississippi State, and have a 2-game losing streak, and they're on him on the radio, and he starts firing back. He starts shooting back. I don't know how that goes over there.
What if one more hypothetical? What if DeBoer says no thanks? Who do they turn to? Do they go crawling to Kiffin? I can't think of anybody else.
At that point, because Dabo, listen, Dabo is he's a smart guy. And sometimes he comes across like, oh, shucks, I'm just old. Dabo's not dumb. We talked several years ago about this, the two of us. I'm sure you've had conversations. And he'd always laugh. Who wants to go in behind Nick? Good guy. Just sort of joking and laughing. He said, plus, I got a great deal here. But, if it continues to be where maybe Dabo doesn't feel as loved as much and it doesn't work out for DeBoer, maybe that next time Dabo says, what's the old cliche? You don't want to be the guy that follows the guy, but maybe it's better to be the guy who follows the guy who followed the guy.
Right.
And at that point, and what kind of clout does Greg Byrne have at that time? That he swung and missed on his first guy. Maybe the old guard moves in. Maybe, other people said, listen, we got to be a guy who's done it for a long time, who knows this place, who's recruited the South. So I could see that. And I don't know about Lane. I mean, I think there's enough opposition because he was just there, had some issues. He got, Saban fired him. Think about this. He got fired the week before the national championship game.
Crazy.
But that doesn't mean, I don't want people to hear the wrong thing, that I don't think Lane could do it or he would be somehow a failure. I think Lane would have, I think there'd be a lot of people if Lane went in there to be head coach in the SEC, and they probably don't, a lot of them don't like him, coaches I'm talking about, ADs at other places, who would wince if Lane got that job, because he would have a Rolls Royce to drive, and he would drive the hell out of it.
Joey Freshwater back in Tuscaloosa.
Yeah. So, it's always it comes down to this. How does DeBoer do? Do they continue to? He's got a little bit more margin for error, I think, Larry, because the playoff now goes to 12 teams. He doesn't have to win the SEC title. Wouldn't you say if you're in the SEC most years, if you're in the top 3 or 4, you're going to get in with 7 at-large spots? And so you have a little bit more margin for error there. It's probably the same with the Big Ten, too. And getting into the playoff is going to be easier than it has been. I mean, Bama would have gotten in 2 years ago. Georgia would have gotten in this year. I mean, Clemson would have gotten in probably 2 years ago, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's going to be easier than it has been, more realistic, and I think that helps a lot too. But you're not going to have to. You can have a hiccup or two during the season, and still be able to get into play for a title. But again, I know I keep referencing this. Let them get in next year as like the 7th seed or the 8th seed and lose to Wisconsin, or I'm just throwing out names here in the first round of the playoff. It'll be like doomsday there in Alabama. Those fans will go crazy.
And it's Saban's still going to be working there. One thing they better not do is have him inside Bryant-Denny in any visible location that the television cameras can zoom in on if they're struggling, because oh boy, that'll be a mess.
Yeah, and I think he too Nick's got is seasoned enough that he's not gonna put himself into a position where he seems to be the guy looking over his shoulder, the new coach's shoulder. I mean, that's his school. He and his wife are going to stay there in Tuscaloosa. That's going to be their home base. So they're going to spend a lot more time down in Florida. But yeah, I mean, the cameras will be looking for him in all the games. The first game that DeBoer coaches, and certainly any time that they're playing poorly, they're going to be searching for him. And there'll be a debriefing period for Saban. Just not being a coach and not being out there every day. I think that's going to be hard for him, Larry. Just not all of a sudden not being a part of running that program and practice and recruiting and evaluating and staff meetings and preparing. I mean, he's done that forever, and he's done it at such a high level, and he's just almost maniacal about the way he goes about that. And now he's not doing it anymore. There's going to be a bit of a hole, a vacuum there for him that he's going to have to figure out how to fill it.
Chris, this has been awesome as always. Our conversations, I always enjoy them, and I really appreciate you sharing so much of your time to be on the podcast.
Yep. Well, enjoyed it, Larry. It's always good to catch up, my friend.
CeeLo is the man. I would love to be a fly on the wall as he's going through something like that in the reporting on Nick Saban and all the process that leads up to that bombshell news that came. Maybe he'll write a book one day after he retires, sort of a tell-all. That'll, of course, be really interesting. Appreciate the support of our sponsors for helping make this happen through the years. Also, thanks mostly to every one of you for hitting that play button. Really appreciate it. Cheers.